The demolition crew was scheduled for Monday. I had until Friday to empty 46 years of my life out of a stone shop my own two hands had built board by board, and I still hadn't found the courage to move the one headstone in the back corner that wasn't for a stranger. It was my wife's. Jesse, the boy I'd raised since he was 8, had spent 4 months putting my name on paper after paper, until the pieces added up to a sale, and he'd never once shown me the shape of what he was building, let alone told me the demolition date. My name is Des Calloway. Everyone in Millbrook Falls calls me Des, except the customers who still call me Mr. Calloway out of a habit their parents taught them back when a man who cut names into granite was somebody you addressed with respect. I'm 72. I've been carving stone since I was 19 years old, since the day Silas Voss looked at my hands across his workbench and told me I had the kind of patience that couldn't be taught. I found out about Monday from Ruth Ann Pyle, who runs the diner 2 doors down and hears everything before the people it concerns do. She came in Tuesday afternoon with a coffee she didn't need to bring me and a look on her face I didn't like. "Des," she said, "you know they're bringing the excavator Monday morning." I set down the chisel I'd been running along a border pattern and looked at her the way you look at someone you're hoping is wrong. "Excavator for what?" "For the shop." "Des, Wilcox Developments got the permit posted at the county office. Big yellow notice, Calloway parcel, demolition and site clearance, dated for the 9th. She wrapped both hands around her coffee like the shop had gotten colder. "I figured somebody would have told you before they told the whole county. Nobody told me anything." I looked down at the stone in front of me. A border pattern for a man named Otis Kessler who died in April. Half-cut, waiting on hands that suddenly didn't feel steady anymore. I didn't even know there was a buyer with a name, Wilcox, out of Harrisburg. They've been putting up those beige townhouses along the river road the last 2 summers. Ruth Ann shook her head slowly. Didn't figure they'd want a stone yard, of all things. But I suppose dirt's dirt to a man like that. I set the chisel down for good and wiped my hands on my apron, though there wasn't any dust on them yet that morning. There hadn't been one afternoon when Jesse sat me down with a folder and asked me to sign my life away. If there had, some old instinct in me, the one Silas spent 9 years drilling into my hands, read it twice, once for what it says and once for what it doesn't, would have caught it. Instead, there were 4 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays, small and forgettable as weather, in March. He came by the counter on a slow morning with a single sheet from the county. "Business license renewal," he said, sliding it across between a customer's receipt and the register drawer. "Sign where the X is." Boring stuff. I signed it standing up, hands still smelling of rock dust, thinking about a headstone due Friday, in April. It was breakfast. He'd taken to stopping by my kitchen, coffee first, then a manila envelope laid casual by the sugar. "Insurance wants an updated signature page. Standard renewal. Nothing's changing." I signed it between bites of toast, half listening to him talk about Page's new job in June. It was the truck on the drive out to the granite supplier in Danville. Nothing to do but watch the fields go by. "Vendors updating their books. Wants a new authorized buyer form," he said, steering with one hand and passing me a clipboard with the other. Basically a formality. I signed it against the dashboard while he talked about a townhouse Page liked, and I didn't think to read it twice. In July, it was a tax filing wrapped in the same easy tone. Quarterly paperwork, he called it. Said he'd walk it to Burns' old firm himself. "Sign here and here. I'll handle the rest." I signed it leaning against the counter, already thinking about the next thing on my list. And Jesse had made himself the man who handled everything that wasn't it. None of it felt like handing anything away. Every time, it felt like being helped by a boy I'd raised to be capable, who could read a form faster than I could. I never once, in 4 months, felt the particular cold of a man signing away something he loved. I only felt the small relief of one more thing lifted off my hands so I could get back to the stone in front of me. That was the part I couldn't forgive later, more than the sale itself. Not one moment I could point to and say, "There, that's where it happened." There was no such moment. He'd built the whole thing out of a dozen small trusts, each too small to notice, the way water takes a stone apart, not by breaking it, but by visiting it, patient and invisible, 1,000 times over. After Ruth Ann left, I drove to the county courthouse myself and asked the clerk, a young woman named Denise, who'd had her father's stone cut here 11 years back, to pull the recorded documents on the shop's parcel. "You want the whole file, Mr. Calloway, or just the deed transfer?" she asked, already halfway to the record room before I'd finished answering. "Whatever's on record. All of it." She was gone longer than I expected. When she came back, she had a stack thicker than I'd braced for, and a look on her face I recognized, because I'd worn it myself delivering bad news to a family that hadn't asked for it. On top was a document titled, "Dressed up to sound gentler than it was," an agreement of business succession and power of sale, dated 3 weeks back, and stapled beneath it 4 other papers I knew by the shape of my own signature. The license renewal from March, the insurance page from April, the vendor form from June, the tax filing from July. "These build on each other," Denise said quietly, tapping the stack, not quite meeting my eyes. Each one gave him a little more authority, and the one on top cites all 4 as prior consent. It's like each was a stone in a wall, Mr. Calloway. You couldn't have seen the wall until it was already up. I called him from the truck in the courthouse parking lot. It rang 4 times before he picked up, and I could hear Paige's voice somewhere behind him, low and quick, the way she talks when she doesn't want to be heard, finishing a sentence. "Grandpa, hey. I was going to call you this week, Monday," I said. "They're sending an excavator Monday." There was a pause that told me everything the words after it tried to walk back. It's not as bad as it sounds. Wilcox is only clearing the yard first, the display stock out front, not the actual building, not right away. And I was going to come by Thursday and help you sort through what you want to. I just came from the courthouse, Jesse. 4 pieces of paper from 4 different months are sitting on the seat next to me, and they add up to a sale of my shop that I never once sat down and agreed to. I sold a business that was losing money every year. You kept giving discounts to people who couldn't pay, Grandpa, and I did it so you'd have something in the bank instead of a leaking roof and unpaid invoices from the Hendersons and the Mercer family and half this town. His voice cracked the way it used to when he was defending himself to his teachers. Every one of those forms was real. I never lied about what a single one of them said. You never lied about any single one. You just never showed me all 4 at once. He didn't have an answer for that fast enough. "I have to go. Paige needs the car. I'll come Thursday, I promise." Then he was gone, and I sat in my truck, in a parking lot I'd parked in 1,000 times, holding 4 pieces of paper with my own signature on them in ink I didn't remember choosing to use. I went back to the shop instead of home. I always go back to the shop when I don't know what else to do with my hands. The building doesn't look like much from the road. Cinder block, and a hand-painted sign Silas made in 1961 that still says Voss and Son Memorial Stone, even though there was never a son, only me, and Silas had painted it that way anyway, the year he made me his partner instead of just his apprentice. Inside, it smells the way it's always smelled. Rock dust, machine oil, and the faint mineral cold that comes off cut granite even in July. I ran my palm along the edge of the granite slab on the main table, out of habit more than anything, checking a seam I'd already checked twice that week. 46 years teaches your hands to look for flaws before your eyes catch up to them. In the back corner, under a canvas drop cloth, was Corinne's stone. I'd started it 8 months after she passed, and I finally could stand to touch the chisel again. It wasn't finished. I'd carved her name, her dates, the first line of the psalm she'd asked for, and then I'd stopped at the border pattern, the same pattern I'd been cutting into a stranger's stone the moment Ruth Ann walked in with her coffee, because some part of me hadn't wanted to be finished with the last thing I'd ever make for my wife. I sat down on the stool at Silas's old workbench, the one I still used because I'd never had the heart to move it. and I put my hand flat against the wood the way I had 10,000 times over 46 years. And that was when I felt it. Not through my palm exactly, but through the stool legs, through the floor, a hollowness under the bench that a bench built solid to the ground shouldn't have had. I got down on my knees on the concrete, 72 years old, with a bad hip, and I ran my hand along the underside of the drawer housing, until my fingers found a seam that didn't belong there. A panel fitted so close to the grain you'd never see it unless you were looking, or unless you'd spent 46 years learning exactly how wood was supposed to sit. There was a small brass keyhole set into the seam, tarnished nearly black. I had 4 days to save my shop, and a locked compartment in a dead man's workbench that I'd never known was there. I didn't have a key that fit a brass lock nobody alive, but me had touched the housing around in over 40 years. What I had was a pry bar, a pair of steady hands, and enough respect for Silas Voss not to want to splinter the wood he'd built to hide something on purpose. It took me the better part of an hour, working the seam a fraction at a time, the way you'd work a stuck drawer instead of a door you meant to break. When the panel finally gave, it came away almost gently, like it had been waiting to be found by someone patient enough to earn it, instead of someone who'd just force it. Inside was a cigar box gone soft at the corners, and under that, a canvas-wrapped bundle the size of a family Bible. I didn't open either one. My hip was screaming at me from kneeling on concrete for the better part of an hour, and Ruth Ann's coffee had gone cold on the workbench. And some old habit in me, the same one that always finished cleaning a stone before I let myself feel anything about who it was for, told me this needed better light and a clearer head than I had at 6 in the evening on the worst Tuesday of my year. I set both bundles back in the housing, closed the panel as best I could without a proper lock to hold it, and stood there a long minute listening to the shop's old refrigerator hum in the front office, the only sound left in the building once I stopped moving. 46 years of knowing every inch of this place, and I just found a room inside it I hadn't known was there. I locked the shop, which felt like locking a house that already belonged to someone else, and drove home to a place that had felt too quiet since Corinne died, and felt quieter still that night. Thursday came the way Jesse's Thursdays always did lately, 20 minutes late, apologizing before he was even out of the truck. Traffic on 9, he said, which wasn't much of an excuse, since Millbrook Falls doesn't have traffic so much as the occasional tractor. He carried a cardboard box, flattened flat, the kind you'd pack a life into. Figured we'd start with the front office, the paperwork, stuff you don't need day to day. I laid all 4 documents out on the counter this morning, Jesse. March, April, June, July. I want you to look at them next to each other before you say another word about boxes. He stopped in the doorway. Behind him, out at the curb, Paige sat in the truck with her phone up, not looking at either of us, which told me she'd known exactly what this conversation would be, and had decided not to be part of it. I signed every one of these thinking I was helping you keep the lights on. Not one of them, by itself, looks like a man giving away his shop. You never handed me the whole picture at once, Jesse. You handed it to me one piece at a time, over 4 months, so I'd never once see the shape of what I was signing until it was already built. He set the flattened boxes down on the counter, slow, like he needed his hands to do something other than reach for me. Every one of those forms did exactly what I told you it did. I never handed you a lie. You handed me the truth in pieces, small enough I'd never add them up. That's not honesty, Jesse. I heard my voice going thin at the edges. Your father used to help me sweep this floor when he was younger than you are now. You think I'd have signed one of those papers if you'd laid the whole plan on this counter and called it what it was? His jaw worked. For a second, just a second, I saw the boy who used to cry in this shop when a piece of granite cracked wrong under his hand, back before he learned to armor that over with the particular calm his wife had taught him, the calm of a man reciting numbers instead of feeling them. The shop was bleeding money, Grandpa. You gave the Hendersons 40% off Wanda's stone because they'd just buried their boy. Same with the Okafor family last spring. I love that about you, but love doesn't pay the property taxes. And Wilcox offered enough to set you up. An apartment near us. No more crawling around on concrete at your age. I didn't ask to be set up. You didn't ask. And that's the problem, Grandpa. You never ask for anything. You just keep giving pieces of yourself away until there's nothing left to give. And somebody had to. He stopped himself, ran a hand down his face. I'm not the villain here. I thought I was fixing something before it broke you. You could have asked what I wanted fixed. Would you have listened? Really listened? Or just signed the way you always do and kept doing exactly what you were doing before I put the paper in front of you? His voice cracked again, higher this time. You skipped your own doctor's appointment last month because the Kessler family needed their father's stone finished. I watched you do that 100 times, Grandpa. Somebody had to make a decision you weren't going to make yourself. It's not broken, Jesse. It's mine. He didn't have an answer for that. He picked the flattened boxes back up, said something about coming Saturday instead, and left with Paige's phone still glowing in the passenger seat. I stood in the doorway of a shop that no longer belonged to me on paper, watching the truck's taillights go small down Route 9, and I felt something I hadn't expected underneath the anger. Not just grief. Curiosity, sharp and unwelcome, pulling me back toward the workbench like a current. I waited until the shop was properly quiet, pulled the chain on the overhead light. Silas had installed himself in 1972, and finally opened the cigar box. Inside were photographs, mostly. Silas younger than I'd ever known him, standing in front of a shop that looked newer, prouder. A woman I didn't recognize. And folded beneath the photographs, a ledger bound in cracked leather, the kind of book you'd use for accounts, except when I opened it. The columns weren't dollar figures owed to Voss and Son. They were dollar figures Voss and Son had never collected at all. Names, dates going back to the 1950s, and beside each one, in Silas's careful hand, the same 3 words written over and over, down page after page. No charge. Widow, no charge. Farm lost, no charge. Boy came home in a box. I recognized some names before I even reached the bottom of the page. Pruitt, Alvarez. A Henderson, though not the same Hendersons I'd cut Wanda's stone for 2 winters back. An uncle, maybe. The family tree of grief in a small town tangling back on itself. 40 pages of names. 40 pages of stones Silas Voss had cut for people who couldn't pay him a cent, and never told a soul, not even the apprentice, who'd spent 9 years across a workbench from him, learning everything else the man had to teach. Beneath the ledger, in the canvas bundle, was a stack of legal-looking papers stapled at the corner, old enough that the staple had rusted a faint orange stain into the top sheet. The heading across the first page was typed in a font I didn't see anymore outside of old county records. I could make out the words United States Patent Office, and beneath that a name, Silas W. Voss, and a date in 1968. 57 years before a boy I'd raised like my own son signed my name onto 4 quiet pieces of paper that added up to a building neither of us understood the full worth of. I couldn't yet say what the papers meant. I only knew, sitting alone in a shop I no longer legally owned, holding proof that the man who'd taught me everything had been keeping the biggest secret of his life directly under my elbows for 4.5 decades. That Friday's deadline had just become the least important date on my calendar. Arthur Byrne had been retired from the law for 11 years. But he still kept an office above the pharmacy on Main Street, mostly because his wife didn't want him underfoot at home. He was 81, moved like his knees cost him something with every step, and he'd known Silas Voss since they were young men in this town. His office hadn't changed much since the one time I'd been in it, 30 years back, settling Silas's estate. Same oak desk, same smell of old paper and pipe tobacco he'd supposedly quit years ago. He set my 2 bundles down on the blotter, like they might bite him, and pulled a pair of reading glasses from his shirt pocket. Silas Voss, he said, half to himself, tapping the patent's cover page. Now there's a name I haven't had reason to say out loud in a long while. He read the patent papers twice before he said anything. Then he took off his glasses and looked at me the way he must have looked at juries once, a long time ago. "You understand what you're holding, Des?" "Not really. I know it's got Silas's name on it and a date. It's a patent for a heat tempering process. Kept granite from fracturing during winter carving, back when half the shops in this county lost stones every cold snap to hairline cracks nobody could see until spring." He tapped the page. "Silas developed this himself, patented it in '68, and licensed it to a materials supplier out of Columbus. That license generates a royalty. Small by big company standards. Not small to a man running a stone shop in a town of 2,000 people. Where does it go? The royalty." Byrne was quiet a moment. "That's the interesting part. Silas set it up so the payments went into a trust tied to the operating business, Voss and Son, and after him, whatever legal entity carried the shop forward. Near as I can tell from these documents, nobody's filed the paperwork to formally claim trustee's status in decades. Which means the money's been accumulating, mostly untouched, administered by the supplier's own accounting department, because nobody ever told them otherwise. I thought of every winter I'd spent worrying over a heating bill I could barely cover. Every year I'd told a grieving family, 'Take your time, pay me when you can,' never knowing there was money sitting somewhere with my own tradings on it that I hadn't earned by cutting stone but might have had every right to. Why didn't he tell me?" Byrne folded his hands. "I asked myself that when I saw the ledger, 40 years of free stones, Des, and never a word to anyone. I think a man like Silas didn't believe generosity counted if you told people about it. He built you a shop, taught you a trade, and figured that was inheritance enough, without wanting a young man's sense of himself built around another man's money." He slid the papers back across the desk. "But here's what matters today, not 40 years ago. I've read the file the county has. 4 small documents and the succession agreement that cites all of them as prior consent. Taken together, they transfer real property, fixtures, and the operating business known as Voss and Son Memorial Stone. Not one of them mentions intellectual property, patents, trust interests, meaning your grandson couldn't sell what he didn't know existed. 4 documents are 40. 4 documents when Wilcox Development bought a building in a name, not a 57-year-old patent trust that was never properly documented as part of the business in the first place." Byrne allowed himself something close to a smile. "It's a mess, Des. But it's a mess in your favor. If we move before anyone else figures it out, we didn't move fast enough." Page called Jesse's cell while I was still in the parking lot outside Byrne's office. I only knew because Jesse called me 20 minutes later, his voice pitched high and fast in a way I recognized from when he was small and had broken something he was afraid to admit to. "Wilcox's lawyer found something about a trust," he said. "Some kind of old patent account tied to the shop. Their guys saying if it's real, it should have been disclosed as a business asset. And now they're threatening to hold up the whole closing. Maybe come after us for the difference." A pause. "Did you know about this? Did you go digging for something to use against me?" "I found it in Silas's workbench, Jesse. It's been sitting under both our elbows for 40 years. Well, it's a problem now. Page is talking about lawyers. My lawyer, their lawyer, God, Grandpa, I just wanted this to be simple. It was never going to be simple, Jesse. You built it out of small pieces because you thought a simple thing would scare me off." He hung up without saying goodbye, which he hadn't done to me since he was 17 and furious about a curfew. I went to the shop that evening to think. And that was when I found Corinne's stone, not where I'd left it under the canvas drop cloth in the back corner. Someone from Wilcox's cleanup crew, following instructions to clear display stock ahead of Monday, had moved it out to the side lot with a dozen other unclaimed pieces, stacked against a chain-link fence under a hand-lettered sign that read Salvage. Free to haul. I stood there a long time before I could make myself walk over. Her name was still cut clean into the granite. Corinne Ann Calloway. The dates. The first line of the psalm. And then nothing. The border pattern unfinished exactly where I'd left it. exactly where I'd been standing when Ruth Ann walked in with a coffee I never drank. Somebody had chalked a number on the side of it in blue crayon. Lot 14. Below it, in the same careless hand, someone had written granite, good conned, like she was a slab of countertop. Instead of 41 years of marriage, instead of the woman who used to bring me lunch out here on Saturdays and sit on an overturned bucket reading while I worked, never once complaining about the dust that got into everything, her hair, her books, the hem of her dress. I found a rag in my truck and wiped the crayon off with more care than the job strictly required. I didn't cry. Not there, not with the highway close enough that a passing truck could see an old man standing over a stack of rubble. I got my hands under the base, and even at 72, even with a hip that had been complaining all week, I moved her 3 feet myself, out of the salvage pile, and set her upright against the shop's back wall, where nobody's crew would touch her again. Then I sat down on the ground beside her the way I used to sit beside her hospital bed in the last months, and I let myself feel, for the first time since Tuesday, exactly how much I stood to lose if I did nothing. Jesse called back near 10 that night. I almost didn't answer. Wilcox's lawyer wants a meeting Saturday, he said. Quieter now, some of the fight gone out of him, before the closing walkthrough. He's saying, if you'll sign something confirming you have no separate claim on any trust or patent interest, they'll still close. No lawsuit. And there's a number, Grandpa. For you. To make it go away clean, no more back and forth. It's not nothing. It'd cover an apartment, a good one, near me and Paige for years. I understood sitting in my dark kitchen with Corinne Stone, 3 feet from a chain-link fence a mile away, exactly what he was offering. Peace, of a kind. Money, of a kind. An ending where nobody in this family ever had to say out loud what had actually happened. 4 quiet signatures, dressed up the whole time as help. And if I don't sign it, then it gets ugly, Grandpa. Public, lawyers, newspaper, maybe this is Millbrook Falls. Everybody already knows the shop's closing, and if it turns into a fight, everyone in town is going to hear every part of it. Grandpa, you still there? I'm here. I looked out the kitchen window at nothing in particular, at the dark shape of the maple tree Corinne had planted the year we married. Say the number, Jesse. Just so I know exactly what you think 46 years is worth, he said it. It was more money than I'd seen in one place in my life, and it landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. I thought about Silas. 40 pages of no charge, widow, never explaining himself to anyone, taking his generosity quietly to whatever peace a man like that found at the end. And I thought about the difference between his silence and the silence Jesse was asking of me now. His had cost Silas nothing but the credit he was owed. This one would cost me the truth about a boy I loved, spending 4 months making sure I never saw the whole picture. Saturday, I said. I'll be there. But I'm not signing anything, and I'm not staying quiet, Jesse. Not this time. He didn't argue. He just said, okay, in a voice that sounded, for the first time all week, like it belonged to someone who already suspected how badly this was going to go, and hung up. Saturday morning brought more people to the shop than I'd seen in one place since Corinne's funeral. I hadn't asked anyone to come. Ruth Ann must have mentioned it at the diner, and from there it spread the way a grease fire spreads in a kitchen that isn't watching close enough. Denise from the courthouse, off the clock near the fence line. The Hendersons, Wanda's whole family, the ones I'd cut a stone for at 40% off 2 winters back. 2 of the Okafor boys, grown now, remembered as children crying at their father's graveside. Word of a shop closing brings out sentiment in a small town. I hadn't expected it to bring out a jury. Wilcox's lawyer arrived at 10 sharp in a gray suit that didn't belong within 50 miles of Millbrook Falls, carrying a leather folder and the briskness of a man who bills by the hour. Jesse came a few minutes behind him, alone, no Paige, which told me something before he opened his mouth. Byrne arrived last, carrying nothing but a manila envelope and 81 years of knowing how a room like this needed handling. I set the ledger, the patent papers, and the 4 small documents from the courthouse side by side on a folding table someone had dragged out for the walkthrough, next to a box of donuts nobody had touched. Ruth Ann caught my eye and gave me a small nod, the kind you give a man before he walks into something he can't walk back out of unchanged. Mr. Calloway. The lawyer extended a hand I didn't take, not out of spite, just because both of mine were full. We're hoping to keep today simple. A clarifying signature, and the closing can proceed as scheduled. I'm not signing anything, I said, the way I'd told Jesse 3 days earlier. But I am going to say something, and I'd like everybody here to hear it, since everybody here seems to have shown up anyway. The lawyer's jaw tightened. Jesse looked at the ground. I didn't raise my voice. I've never been a man who raised his voice. Not at Corinne. Not in this shop. Not even the day the county called about Silas Hart giving out at his workbench. And I had to keep my hands steady enough to finish the stone I was working when the phone rang. I opened the ledger to a page near the middle and read 4 names out loud. Henderson, Okafor, Pruitt, Alvarez. Beside each, in Silas Voss's careful hand, 3 words, no charge. Widow, I looked up. My teacher wrote that in this book 40 different times and never told a soul, including me, and I stood across a workbench from that man for 9 years. He gave this town more than any of you will ever find in a county filing, and he did it quietly, because he didn't believe kindness needed an audience to be real. I held up the second stack of papers. What some of you might not know is that Silas held a patent, a process for tempering granite so it wouldn't crack in a hard winter. It's been generating a small royalty for 57 years into a trust that was never formally claimed, because nobody ever told the family it existed. It isn't named anywhere in the 4 documents my grandson gathered from me, one at a time, over 4 months, because my grandson didn't know it existed either. You can't sell what you don't know you're holding, and you can't build a sale, honestly, out of pieces nobody ever saw laid out together. The lawyer opened his folder like it might argue for him. That's a claim we'd need to review with counsel before. Review it, Byrne said, stepping forward, his voice carrying the flat, unhurried authority of 30 years in courtrooms. I've already filed notice with the county recorder's office establishing Mr. Calloway's claim to trustee status on the Voss patent interest, predating your client's closing date. Your purchase agreement, and every document it leans on, transfers real property and fixtures. It does not, and cannot, transfer an asset your client's own paperwork never identified. I'd take that back to your firm before anybody signs another document today. The lawyer looked at the crowd. Ruth Ann with her arms crossed, Denise not bothering to hide whose side she was on. Hendersons standing close together, the way families do once they've decided which way they're leaning. And I watched Tim Kine do the math. A certain kind of man does. When a deal stops being simple and starts being expensive in ways that show up in newspapers. I'll need to speak with my client, he said, which is what that kind of man says when he already knows how it's going to end. He walked toward the road with his phone already at his ear. Nobody stopped him. That left Jesse, standing in the gravel lot, in front of a shop his great-grandmother's second husband had helped Silas pour the foundation for, in front of a crowd who'd known him since he was a boy riding his bike past this building on his way to the creek, and in front of me. I didn't know about the patent, he said, quiet, not performing it for the crowd, just saying it because it was true. About any of it. I thought I was protecting you, and I told myself that every time I put one of those forms in front of you, because it was easier than explaining the whole plan at once. If I had, you'd have asked me questions I didn't have good answers for. So I gave you pieces small enough you never had a reason to ask. You didn't ask either, I said. That's the whole thing, Jesse. Not the money, not the building. In 4 months, you never once asked what I wanted. You decided, and made sure I never saw enough at one time to decide anything back. His eyes were wet, and he didn't wipe them. I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix 4 months of this in one Saturday morning. You don't, I said. You fix it the way Silas fixed things. Slow, quiet. 1 stone at a time, and you don't get to tell anybody about it until it's done, if you ever tell them at all. What about Paige? He asked, quiet. That's between you and her. Not something I'll carry for you. I looked at him a moment, 72 years old, looking at a grown man I still half saw as the boy sweeping this floor with a broom too tall for him. I'll tell you what I told Silas once, when I thought I'd ruined a stone beyond fixing. A crack doesn't mean you throw the whole piece away. It means you learn where the stone was weak and work around it next time. He nodded, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and didn't say anything else for a while. I didn't hug him there in front of half the town. That wasn't where either of us was yet. But I told him the shop would still need hands come Monday, if he wanted to learn what his hands were for, and that he could come back and carry stone, sweep floors, load the truck. Every part of the work except the part where he put a document in front of me ever again, for as long as I was alive to read it myself. Wilcox Development's attorney called Burns' office Monday morning to withdraw from the purchase entirely, citing what his letter called unresolved title complications. The excavator never came. The demolition crew got reassigned to a resurfacing job 2 towns over, and nobody in Millbrook Falls saw them again. Ruth Ann heard about the withdrawal before I did, same as she'd heard about the demolition, and she brought a coffee that Monday afternoon that I actually drank, sitting on a bucket in the doorway while the October light came in low and gold across the gravel. It took 3 more weeks of paperwork with Byrne before the trustee filing was finalized and the shop was mine again, cleanly on record, with a modest but real trust income flowing where it should have flowed for half a century. Enough to fix the roof for the first time since Silas patched it, enough that I stopped needing to choose. Some winters, between a family's grief and my own heating bill, I finished Corinne's stone on a Thursday in October, working the border pattern slow, the way Silas had taught me, the way I imagine he worked every one of those 40 stones he never charged for. When it was done, I set it where it belonged, not against a chain-link fence with a number chalked on the side, but in the quiet corner where the morning light comes through the east window first, beside the doorway where customers would see it. Walking in, I mounted a small brass plaque I cut myself plain, the way Silas would have wanted it, in memory of Silas W. Voss, who taught a boy patience and gave the rest away quietly, so no one would ever have to ask. Just showed up that Monday like he said he would, in work boots that still looked too new, and I handed him a broom before anything else. Because that's exactly how Silas had started with me 53 years earlier. In this same shop, under this same roof, I'd nearly lost to 4 quiet signatures and a grandson who loved me enough to be afraid, and not quite brave enough yet to ask. I used to think betrayal came like weather, a chill before the storm breaks. I know better now. Sometimes it comes one ordinary signature at a time, until the day you lay every piece on the counter and finally see the shape of what was taken. If someone you trusted ever asked for your signature on something small that turned out much bigger, tell me in the comments. And if you're new here, welcome. There are more stories like mine waiting for you. This story blends recreated characters and events, told for reflection rather than as a literal account,